sorry, in the chat. And then let me also share my screen and we will get started here. All right. Hopefully all can see this. Let's see. First up, let me call the meeting to order. And we'll start with our land acknowledgement. Although we're all joining virtually tonight, we'd like to start this event acknowledging that we are on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. If you'd like to learn more about whose land you occupy and have occupied, see this helpful map at native-land.ca. I will also remind membership that in addition to these land acknowledgements before each meeting, we also do make a donation to the Duwamish tribe as the 43rd. All right, and then just some general meeting operations, reminders, and hygiene things. If you need to seek the floor, just raise your hand. We'll be able to recognize you and get you unmuted and call on you for that. If we happen to need to take a quick poll, we'll use the reactions. There's nothing that we have planned to vote on today, so I don't expect we'll need to do any quick polls. General chat should be disabled or will be disabled shortly. We'll have it open to ask questions of Senator Peterson and Frank Chop when we get to that portion to help us facilitate the little mini town hall that we have with them. We are live streaming on YouTube, and so we'll have that recording out there as well for people to access down the road. Just a reminder on our meeting norms: treat each other with dignity and respect. If you don't know, just ask. Happy to take questions that people have about what's happening, etc. Step up, step back. We are a volunteer org. We don't run without you all stepping up and participating, but also please step back and allow others to have their own participation as well. And if we work together, we can get out of this meeting on time at 9 o'clock. Robert's rules are here again. Again, I don't expect that we will have anything that we will need to vote on or anything like that. So it's just a little bit pro forma right now, but if you don't know how to do something, just raise your hand and we'll help you turn that into a motion. You have a right to participate as a full member. If you need us to slow down, if you have a question to ask, just raise your hand and we will do that. Okay. With that, I have the agenda showing here. Let me, because I think Zoom does not make the chat available to people who start after a chat is put in there. Here's the agenda again. Do I have someone who would move to approve the agenda? And just raise your hand if so. Thank you, Linda. And Chris and Jacob. We will approve this agenda. First thing up is the approval of the minutes from October. I will put that into the chat as well. Can I get somebody who would like to move that we approve the minutes from October? All right, Jacob, thank you. All right. So let's see. First up, for my chair report, as Linda has already put in the chat and we talked about briefly earlier, the Seattle Redistricting Commission has voted on their final district maps. The map that they voted on seemed to work out well for the 43rd. It did not split up Fremont as an earlier proposal had made. It also did not split up the U district as a subsequent proposal was made. I will, in my follow-up meeting email, I will include a link to where you can see what the final maps are. They're not terribly far off of what they are currently for the 43rd, areas impacted by the areas within the 43rd. So all in all, it seems like a pretty good set of maps that adheres to racial and equity justice concerns. That's great. Second thing is, it is flu season. If you haven't gotten your flu shot, I would encourage you to do so. The King County Health Department has links where you can get flu shots. You can also get the updated bivalent COVID booster shots at the same time. So there's that. Also, a week ago, as you're probably all aware, we did hold the November elections. It's very exciting. The results on our Washington Senator Patty Murray winning. Kim Schreier also seems to have won in the House. Of course, Pramila Jayapal won very handily in her district. And at the state level, we'll hear from Frank and Jamie about state results. I should also note that our representatives, Jamie Peterson, Frank Chop, and Nicole Macri also won their races very well with more than 98% of the vote, which is great. Joan, yes, here, let me unmute you and.
Will you make the font bigger on the agenda?
Oh, sure, yeah, of course. Sorry about that. How's that? Oh, hold on. That's a little too big. My machine is running slow with Zoom going here, so. All right, is that a little better? All right, thank you for pointing that out, Joan. Okay. Next, Tara, would you like to talk about the 43rd reorg?
Okay, I will, although my dog has just taken this moment to decide to start barking. But I will, and I will continue. I will be sharing my screen. Okay, so reorganization is coming up. Here we are. What is it? This is every 2 years. All the political organizations, LDs and counties get together to elect a new board of officers. And also this is an opportunity to amend the bylaws. So the idea is kind of restart. That's why it's called reorganization, kind of regroup and get back together. And that will be at our usual meeting time in January, Tuesday, the 17th, the third Tuesday. Oops, sorry. And this is good for elected PCOs and all voting members. Some offices one votes for, the other does not. The main thing we want to do tonight is let you know this is coming. And also let you know the officers that will be elected on that day. If you're interested in running, or if you just want to know what's going on, or if you're not even really up on the structure of the organization. So we will be voting for chair and vice chair, treasurer, secretary, state committee members. There's 2 of those. King County representatives, there's 2 of those, and the King County Democrats alternates, there's 2 of those. So that's representatives to the State Central Committee and representatives to the King County Democrats Central Committee. We also elect the chairs of the standing committees. These are all the committees. And if we elect the chairs so that they are on the board to coordinate work and get that clear. Oops, sorry, I am terrible with the slides today. Okay, the position rules. Each position shall be held by 1 individual. We don't have co-chairs or co-secretaries because that has proven to be logistically difficult. The committees, there should be 1 chair who is the one ultimately knowing what's going on and responsible, and they can have subcommittee chairs or vice chairs, but we will elect only 1 person to each position. There are gender restrictions on some of the positions, and the 43rd actually adopted a policy that is slightly different. Essentially on the 43rd practice, chair and vice chair cannot both be male. State committee members and King County representatives and alternates cannot both be male. Ideally, they're gender mixed, but not both male. Okay, who can vote? This gets to be a bit much because the basic structure of the organization is the PCOs, a chair and vice chair, and then the representatives to party organizations. Those officers are elected only by PCOs. For all the other positions, which are more of running the organization, all voting members pay for those. Here is where you really need to be aware. PCO terms all end on November 30th. Only PCOs who were elected this summer, which means either you filed and didn't have an opponent and automatically became the elected PCO, or you won an election. Only those PCOs will be PCOs in January and able to vote for those offices. If you were not elected last summer and you're interested in being appointed as a PCO, or you would like to be reappointed, we can do that in January after the election, but we cannot do that before the election. And that's not our choice. That is the statutory way that the organizations are formed. At this point, because we've gone over a few things, I'll stop and ask if there's any questions. I'm going to go next into officer descriptions, but if you have any questions about the voting. Okay. Board member responsibilities. Fulfill responsibilities for your board position. We have a document that has more detail about a lot of the positions. If we can, we'll put a link to that in the chat. Obviously, the committee chairs, you can figure that out. Chair and vice chair do everything. Are responsible for making sure everything's done. You fulfill your responsibilities. There's monthly general meetings. Monthly board meetings are held on the first Tuesday. If you're committee chair, you will need to recruit committee members and should hold 1 committee meeting a month. These can be online, in person, whatever suits. King County representatives are expected to attend monthly King County Democrats meetings. Those are most likely to continue to be online, so you won't have to worry about transportation. State committee members need to attend quarterly state committee meetings, which will be in person, and they are in various locations around the state. Also, the state committee would like us to remind people interested in state committee that the first meeting, which will be the state reorg meeting, will be January 28th in Olympia. So keep that in mind if you're interested. Bylaws updates. This is also a time where we can more easily amend the bylaws. Generally speaking, we can do that any time during the year, but it takes a 2/3 vote of the PCOs, and there has to be published notice of any amendment to be proposed. At the reorganization meeting, it's a simple majority of the PCOs. We also amended our bylaws that the first regular meeting followed by reorganization can still introduce bylaws amendments and have them voted by a simple majority. That's just in case the meeting runs long, we have an opportunity to go back to it again. So if you're interested, you can look at our bylaws and see if there's any changes that you would like to bring to the reorg meeting. How do you get involved? If you're an elected PCO, please attend the meeting. If you're a paid voting member, if you've paid in 2022, that membership is good through January of 23, so you will be able to vote at that meeting. If you're new to the 43rd, you're interested in becoming a member, you would need to pay by January 7th to be a voting member. And any dues paid from now until January are 2023 dues. So get your membership going now, and we will send out an email with a form for people who are interested. Sorry, this did not get updated. We will be emailing out a form for people who are interested in running for an office to submit a candidate statement, which will then be distributed to the membership. That will come in January, early January. And other ways to get involved: become a PCO. If there isn't one in your precinct, we will be able to appoint after the reorg. We also have some appointed positions, which are not elected, but we do need people for. Deputy treasurer, back up to the treasurer, able to help with PDC filing. Young Democrats representative, this is preferably a student in any school in the district. Bylaws and Rules Committee chair is appointed not because it's not a standing committee, because it does not need to meet regularly. It meets only as needed. And mutual aid chair, mutual aid is actually a subcommittee of the policy committee, but it's a very specifically tasked role. So that's called out as a specific appointment. Also, if you don't think you have time to be an officer, that's fine, but you are encouraged to volunteer to be on one of the committees and do as much work as suits your schedule. We always need more volunteers on the committees. As soon as we get new chairs, we'll be talking those up. Join as a voting member, attend the meetings, tell your neighbors and friends to join us. And of course, always participate in our Get Out the Vote efforts. Are there any questions about any aspect of reorg or the board setup? Yes, Chris.
Hi, I'm just curious how you find out who your PCO person is. I went to the 43rd website and there is a PCO database listed, but the link doesn't work. And I sent an email to Cody, Cody Olson, and I haven't received a response. So I'm just curious if that's up-to-date information or not.
Yeah, so I'll just jump in here. Yeah, I can speak to you about that. Did you send me an email recently? Did it get lost perhaps in my inbox and I haven't responded yet? Was it from a while back?
Hi, Cody. It was about a week ago, and actually I followed it up, I think today, but great. If it's, there's no rush.
Yeah, I'll make sure I respond to that. And
Thanks.
I can let you know who's the PCO, if anyone in your precinct.
Great, thanks.
All right, are there any other questions about any aspect of the board or the reorg meeting? All right, hope to see everybody in January.
Can I add something about gender policy, Tara?
If you want to.
Okay. Hi, everyone. This is Amy Madden. I'm your state committee representative, or one of them. And I just wanted to add that the 43rd did pass a resolution in support of what I've been calling a restorative gender policy, where we can elect, where the rules were that you have to elect a man and a woman. It has changed over time to allow folks of other genders. And the rules have been for a while, it needs to be folks of two different genders. And the 43rd has overwhelmingly supported the idea of we need to allow for two women to serve or two non-binary folks to serve. The only thing that we would rather not have is two men serving, because we want to restore gender balance in our organization's leadership. So the situation as it currently is with King County Democrats is that the bylaws preclude that when it comes to electing King County representatives. However, Scott Forbes, who worked a lot on the rules and bylaws for King County Democrats as former chair of the 43rd, has drawn up a proposal to change those bylaws so that the King County Democrats take on a gender restorative policy as well. And a number of us are going to be moving that change at reorg this year. So if you are a PCO and you would like to be involved with that, please do send me a message. My contact information is also on the 43rd Democrats website, 43rddems.org. Get a hold of me so we can get you in the committee that's working on this. We want to pass a gender restorative policy for this, for King County wide, so that we can have more women serving, more non-binary folks serving. King County reorg, put it on your calendars. It's December 11th. So PCOs, we got to show up for that and vote through this policy. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Amy. And thank you, Tara, for walking us through the reorg. Robin, are you here?
I'm here.
Or Tim? Okay, perfect. Oh, there you are. Here, let me spotlight you so everyone can see more easily. I'll just do a little intro here. Robin heads up the 43rd Environmental Committee, and they had a meeting on November 10th with Representatives Frank Chopp and Nicole Macri. So we wanted to give Robin a few minutes to give a summary of that meeting and also to put in a plug for the Environmental Committee.
Yeah, thanks. So Tim Gould is also he's like the chair, and I'm helping on the Environmental Caucus, and we meet once a month on the third Monday. And the last meeting we had was a meeting with Frank Chopp and Nicole Macri, and that was great. We discussed a lot of the legislation that they're thinking about sponsoring, which I won't say more about right now because I'm sure we're going to hear more directly. And then we had just a great conversation around a number of different climate issues like building electrification, the Climate Commitment Act, housing and transportation. So we're kind of looking ahead to the legislative session where there's actually environmental caucuses in, I think, most of the different Seattle legislative districts. And we have this kind of group of the caucuses that get together, and we're going to work together this year on tracking the environmental and climate-based legislation. So we're working on that and putting together a table that we can kind of use for tracking the legislation as it goes through the session and all the budget items as well, because it's a budget year. And I guess I'd say that if anyone wants to join our meetings at any time, that would be super. And I can put my email in the chat. It's a great group. It's mostly focused on climate, both at the local and state level, and we talk about other environmental things as well. So thanks, Paul.
Cool. Thank you very much, Robin. All right. And with that, we will launch into the main part of our evening. Move spotlight. Jamie and Frank, I see you here. Let me see if I can I do a dual spotlight? Give me a second here while I find it. There's Frank. Oh, it's replace spotlight. I can't do a dual spotlight. Well, we got you right now, Jamie. And here's Frank for everyone who is not familiar with Frank. 1 second. Now I gotta find Jamie again. My apologies on this. Okay, so yeah, we've got Senator Jamie Peterson, our re-elected senator from the 43rd. Congratulations, Jamie. It'll be great to have you represent us for the next 4 years again. And Representative Frank Chop, who was also re-elected. Nicole Macri, unfortunately, is in transit to Washington, D.C. right now, and so she was unable to join us. But I've got some information from her that I will relay, as I said before. So the framework for this, or the schedule for this evening, is that both Jamie and Frank will spend about 5 minutes or so talking about what is top of mind for them, some of their priorities. And then they'll spend some minutes telling us how we can stay informed and how we can influence the session. And then we'll have a good long period of about 30, 45 minutes, maybe more, depending upon how much time each of them have and the amount of questions that are from everybody, where we can engage with them on issues that matter to us, to understand how those might fit into the legislative agenda for this upcoming session. All right, so that was a lot. So with that, Senator Peterson, if you wouldn't mind kicking us off, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And thanks everybody for being here. It's great to see you. I'm happy to go first. I think that's what Frank would have wanted. He usually makes me go first. So anyway, I think, Paul, we talked about starting with a little report on the election. And so in my capacity as chair of the Washington Senate Democratic Campaign, I am super excited to report that we had a really, really good week. We're coming back not only having reelected all of our incumbent members, but actually having won the open seat in the 47th district. And for the first time since I've been in the legislature, we'll have a Democrat representing the 42nd district, which is most of Whatcom County. And that's when we've been trying over and over and over again. And finally, this time, Representative Sharon Shoemake came over, and by a pretty narrow margin, less than 1,000 votes, was able to win there. So 3 key races: the Shoemake race in the 42nd, the Claudia Kaufman race in the 47th district, which is Kent and Covington, and then Emily Randall's race in the 26th, which is Gig Harbor and southern part of Kitsap County. So we'll actually have a bigger majority, 29 to 20. The other thing that is remarkable about that 29 member majority is that it is going to include 16 women. So well over half of our caucus will be women now. 10 people of color, so over a third of the members of the caucus are people of color, and then 4 members of the LGBTQ community. So lots of diversity and a really great group of people. We're going to be gathered tomorrow all day for a caucus retreat, talking about priorities and beginning the process of reorganization. We're also then going to have committee on committees on Friday, and we should have that work wrapped up by next Monday. Really, the big changes are because of a couple of retirements that we have out of the Seattle delegation. Senator Reuven Carlisle, who has chaired the Energy, Environment, and Technology Committee, has left the legislature. And so we have to choose a new chair for that committee in whatever configuration. I would put money on Senator Joe Nguyen, likely being that person. We also have to choose a person to replace Senator David Frocht, who's now a fellow member of the 43rd District over in Laurelhurst. And David has chaired very ably the Capital Budget Committee for the last few years. That is likely to be Senator Mark Mullet in the future. So stay tuned for news about that. But we do have a solid Democratic majority, and I think we're going to be, we will not be the roadblock on a lot of good progressive things that are going to happen in this next session. Do you want to, should we maybe go back and forth? Frank, do you want to talk about the House elections first, and then we can move on?
Whatever you want, Jamie.
Yeah,
we're in the majority.
Why don't you do that for a second, and then it looks like your majority might grow too.
Yes, thanks, Jamie. I was speaker for over 20 years. I sweated this thing every day for 20 years. Now I'm not the speaker, so I'm not sweating it. But suffice to say that the good news is that we've maintained a healthy majority, and I'm really appreciative of all of Jamie's work to make sure that the Senate also has a workable progressive majority. For many years, going back 10 years or so, there was many years where the House Republicans were really in charge over in the Senate. So with Jamie's leadership as the chair of the campaign committee over there, I want to hug you there, Jamie, because you did great work. Having 29 members in the Senate Democratic Caucus will definitely help move the progressive agenda. And so that enabled us to then develop progressive policies to move them forward, not only in the House, but in the Senate. If you want, we could check on the House membership, but just to say that we've got 57 members before the election. We'll have more than that after the election. I'll have to check on the specific numbers, but the key is having both the House and the Senate with workable progressive members. So I'm very pleased about that. If you want, I can go and talk about each district, but I'd rather get into the issues. Now that we got a majority, let's do something with it.
Okay. Good segue. So from my perspective, I'm, one of the nice things about working with Frank and Nicole is that among the three of us, we really do a good divide and conquer approach to a lot of issues. So Nicole sent around a paper that highlighted a bunch of issues, including healthcare and housing. So I'll defer to her and Frank on those. A few that I wanted to spotlight as big issues for the upcoming session are, number one, what to do about the Blake decision. So 2 years ago, late in session, the state Supreme Court struck down our felony drug possession statute, and the legislature struggled mightily to come up with some sort of replacement. I think a solid majority of us agree that in the long term, we don't want a criminal law approach to drug possession, that we want to think of it as a healthcare problem. But the problem is how to get from here to there while we build a brand new system, essentially, that can do that. And, we came up with an approach sort of on the fly in the 2021 session that still used a misdemeanor that could be filed only after 2 diversions. And, I think there's probably nobody who's super happy with how that has been working. So we're going to have, I predict, a really significant controversy in both the House and the Senate, because we've got probably decent majorities in both of the Democratic caucuses that would prefer to have full decriminalization of possession, but I don't think there are majorities of either body that are in that position. So we're going to have a lot of work to do to figure out what our, and I should say that the sort of Band-Aid that we came up with 2 years ago expires on July 1st, 2023. So we have to do something, or else the whole thing goes away, including preemption of local ordinances. So you could see jurisdictions, cities and counties around the state recriminalizing and making it a gross misdemeanor. So I think everybody's interested in avoiding that. So that's one big issue. Second big issue really has to do with education funding. So we've been pretending for the last 2 years or so that the same number of kids were going to public school as went in 2019 before the pandemic, to try to keep districts whole and avoid having too much turmoil for them. I think there's no likelihood that we're going to continue to pretend that 2019 numbers are still in effect. But rather than just putting that savings from a lower number of kids in public schools into other things, I think there's going to be a substantial conversation about whether we can essentially preserve the education funding box and use it for some of the things that have been underfunded. And top of the list for me is funding for kids with disabilities for special education, which amazingly the Supreme Court did not insist was part of basic education. But I just fundamentally can't understand how you can say that services that are required by state and federal law to be provided are anything but basic education. So there's going to be there will be a lot of discussion about that, and I certainly encourage on all of these issues involvement from folks here in our district. Last big issue or set of issues that I'll mention is around the environment. The carbon tax, the fee from the Climate Commitment Act, is producing more revenue than we anticipated. And so there's going to be, I think, pitched battle to make sure that those revenues are used for the purposes for which they're intended and are spent into the crisis as intended to help us speed up the transition away from carbon and to clean fuels. There's also going to be, I think, a big fight about producer responsibility for plastics. And so looking forward to helping try to get that legislation across the finish line. Finally, Paul asked me to mention some things that I was working on and excited about. So I'll mention just 3 quickly. Number one, continuing to be at the center of the legislature's work on gun violence prevention. And I will be prime sponsoring a bill that will impose liability on gun manufacturers for the harms that their products cause. That's very consistent with a long tradition of public nuisance laws in our state dating back to territorial days. Second, I've been working with advocates for transgender folks, as well as domestic violence survivors and refugees, on a bill that will make it possible for people, when they have their name changed, to seal the records of that name change so that they can preserve their safety. And finally, I'm working on a new approach to repealing the death penalty, and look forward to talking more about that. But I'm super happy to be here and answer your questions. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Frank.
Well, thanks, Jamie, very much. It's great to work with you, and also with Nicole. I do want to say that Nicole can't be with us tonight because guess what? She's back east getting a national award for her work in housing on the several fronts, including behavioral health and the intersection between housing and health. So I'm thinking of her tonight, but she's very deserving of that award because of her work at Downtown Emergency Service Center, plus also as in legislature as vice chair of the Appropriations Committee. I mean, she's critical to moving our state forward on all sorts of issues. Having said that, I do want to point out a couple of differences between the House and the Senate. The Senate has, they're going into what they call the retreat for the Senate. In the House, we call it the advance. I did that as a play in words years ago, and people make fun of it. But you know, what the hell? We don't retreat. We're Democrats. We advance. Sorry about that, Jamie. I couldn't help myself. I want to say one more thing about the election. You see, if you look at the election closely enough, these races in swing districts were actually fairly close in many cases, and we were obviously Democrats benefited from the backlash on the abortion decision by the U.S. Supreme Court. Also, in reaction to Trump, which has really helped us politically, and then also the Republicans in Washington State just didn't have their act together in terms of candidates and campaigns and all the rest of that. So we got lucky. We can't take that for granted looking forward into the next several years. So we're going to do a lot of good this next 2 years, as we have done for many years. But just keep in mind, we got to keep in that sense, that tension across the state of Washington on these issues and in very specific districts. Now, having said that, the House Democratic Caucus did a survey of our members to identify sort of priorities, not exclusive priorities, but top priorities of what we should work on in the House Democratic Caucus. And there were 3 of them. First one was, surprise, surprise, housing. Second one was another surprise, tax reform. And third one is behavioral health. And I didn't stack the ballot box on this, by the way. That just the whole caucus voted over the last week and came up with priorities that actually fit completely the stuff I've been working on over the last many months as well as years. So there's 5 points that I'd like to talk about and what I'm working on. And look forward to your questions as well about other issues, but just the ones I've been really focused in on. First and foremost, but not only, is the Apple Health and Homes program. We passed significant legislation this last session to create the Apple Health and Homes program because 70% of those who are chronically homeless, these are our neighbors, by the way, 70% of those who are chronically homeless are homeless because of their medical condition. So what we say in that legislation, that if you're homeless because of your medical condition, then you should have a home as part of your medical treatment. And this is legislation that we passed that is leading the nation in terms of making the connection between housing and healthcare, which to anybody who thinks about it is pretty obvious, but we made significant progress, and now we have to implement that bill, that legislation, and we are working on all cylinders to not only fund it, but also identify specific projects all across the state, in Spokane, Yakima, Vancouver, etc. So it's very heartening to see it being implemented after just taking one session to get it passed. Now we have to actually implement it. Second one has to do with the Housing Trust Fund. Years ago, I helped start the Housing Trust Fund statewide, and with the initial funding. And then for the last many years, we've been adding funding through the capital budget. What we need for the Housing Trust Fund, because of the crisis in housing affordability, we need an ongoing revenue source to fund subsidized social housing that is either owned by public development authorities or private nonprofits who pledge to keep the housing affordable forever. This notion of social housing is extremely important, and I very much appreciate the 43rd District Democrats endorsing Initiative 135, which will be on the ballot early next year in the city of Seattle. We have to control the housing, which not only controls the rents, but also make sure that the housing is permanently affordable and not subject to sort of trickle-down economic theory about involving the private for-profit sector. So we have a specific proposal about that involving the real estate excise tax to make a progressive addition to the real estate excise tax and dedicate it to the Housing Trust Fund as we go forward. Third area is, I assume you've all been paying attention for many years, in that there's a huge inequality of wealth in this community, particularly in terms of the major source of most people's wealth is their home. And so we have a proposal called the Covenant Reinvestment Account to significantly address the racist policies in the state of Washington, where they were called real estate covenants. And the covenants, if you read the actual language in the real estate documents where you buy a house and they put out all the specifics of it, the language is so bad and so disgusting. It's like we have to do something about it. So luckily, when somebody asked me a year ago, hey, Frank, I'd like to do something about black home ownership. What can we do? I said, well, here's an idea. Because the state of Washington participated in documenting those racist real estate covenants that banned people of color from buying homes in much of the state, we're saying, and also, by the way, the state of Washington defended those racist practices in front of the Supreme Court on 2 occasions years ago. So we're saying, instead of it being just something about affirmative action to help people of color, no, we want mitigation to correct and to address the wrong that the state of Washington participated in. So it's a real simple idea, and it's actually a positive thing, where we are proposing that we add another $100 to the document recording assessment in order to go into the covenant reinvestment account to fund significant down payment assistance for BIPOC individuals and families to buy a home. It really is all about the American dream, about home ownership, the American dream, a very positive thing. And we feel we can move forward now that we've had the election that gave us progressive votes. People have been talking about this issue for decades. Now it's time for us to do something about it. And I've set up a coalition with a whole bunch of people, including several senators, several House members that are actively supporting this effort. But we could use legal minds like Jamie to help us think through the specific language of the thing so that we actually do what we have in mind. It's significant because it would create about $3 billion over a generation, which is considered 20 years. So I'm really excited about this one because people are really supportive of it, but we have to attend to the details. Okay, fourth area is I agree with Jamie about the need for education funding in special education. Jamie was an absolute leader in terms of funding of our K-12 schools and basic education. And I'm so glad, obviously, that he's working on special ed. So I'm proposing a package that would not only fund special education, but other services for people with disabilities, including community services that are needed for people with developmental disabilities, as well as issues over housing for people with disabilities, like Apple Health and Homes for the homeless, but also workforce needs. We have a real shortage of workforce. And so I have a specific idea in mind about how to fund that, and we'll see how people respond. Stay tuned on that one. I'm working on 4 revenue ideas. The 3 of them are well developed. This last one, as Jamie, I can see him smiling there. Well, let's hope it works out, but we'll see. Sorry to give you something to be suspenseful about. So, but the last category, number 5, is about about workforce. We are really short of nurses, behavioral health workers, early education teachers, etc. Now, luckily, in 2019, we passed the Workforce Education Investment Act, which raised $1 billion over 4 years with a progressive revenue source. So we've already done this, and we literally funded, most of that money went to fund free college and university tuition for all low-income students in our state. The best financial aid program in the nation by far. So we've got a good foundation, but we need to then invest additional money to really recruit and train and certify workers in key areas of public service, like nursing and behavioral health workers and things like that. So we will be working to expand the Workforce Education Investment Account in a way that, well, the public will strongly support, because everybody needs a nurse someday. And so, and many people need behavioral health services, for example. And everybody needs a home. So those are the 5 things. I could go on forever, but I'll end it at that. Thank you.
All right, thank you to both Frank and Jamie. So briefly, how would you recommend that the 43rd members stay up to date on the progress happening in this upcoming session? What are some of the best ways for us to do that?
Well, you mind me going first on this one, Jamie? Well, actually, I saw Dawn post a thing there for dealing with redlining and all that. Yes, we need grassroots support all across the state. So advocating for American concepts, which is home ownership and the American dream, needs to be shared by everybody in our community. That's a very positive thing. And that covenant reinvestment account is something that affects people statewide. So having the state Democratic Party weigh in later during the session in support of that common sense notion and that sort of basic philosophy would be very helpful. I've got a stakeholder group with over 30 stakeholders who are regularly meeting to refine that proposal, including everybody from Denny Heck, the Lieutenant Governor, to Jamie. I met with Yasmin Trujillo from Tacoma today. She's fully supportive of this, as well as a bunch of House Democrats. So we need to get the word out that this is a positive construction approach to dealing with something that is just horrible heritage of this state. So I could see folks, if you are interested, send me an email and we could plug you into our stakeholder group, our coalition that we're building. And it involves a lot of community organizations, nonprofits, as well as elected officials. So if you're interested in doing something that I think might be the best in the nation, Jamie, I sorry to bring that up again, but it's sort of fun to do that. And so if you're interested in that particular issue, to right a terrible wrong, then send me an email and we can plug you into the various groups that are working on it.
Okay, and so then I'll add to that, maybe as a good segue, that one of the things that we learned during the pandemic and are not going to change is that people are going to continue to be able to testify on bills and sign in on bills remotely. So we've seen just an absolute explosion in the number of folks who are able to participate in our process because of not having to drive all the way to Olympia and sit there and wait, maybe to be called for 30 seconds of testimony. So, and I'll tell you, on some of the most controversial issues that we deal with, for example, on gun violence prevention, the Alliance for Gun Responsibility, Grandmothers Against Gun Violence, Moms Demand Action have been able collectively to get literally thousands of people signed in support of really sensible gun violence prevention measures. That's just one example, but that's true all across the committee structure in the legislature. So find whatever groups you want to, and Nicole and I think Frank even sometimes will send out pretty regular email updates during the session. We're also getting ready, I think, to do another session preview that would be an old-fashioned paper, but that would let people sign up for regular updates during the session. There are a lot of ways, obviously, that you can get some of that from the paper, from other advocacy groups. But once you get, and the legislative system also allows you to sign up on particular bills and get notices of when there are hearings coming up. So I really encourage you, not just to write to us, because sometimes that can probably feel like, well, they already agree with me. What am I accomplishing? But get involved in the process itself, because it really makes a difference for legislators to see that there were, 5,000 people signed in support of some bill. That kind of organizing makes an impression on legislators. So, another and newish way of staying involved in the process.
Would you say that it's just as effective to sign in favor of for or against a bill as it is to actually provide testimony?
Probably the answer is yes. I mean, the reality is on the bills that are the most high profile, only a pretty small group of people are actually going to get to testify, because we're loath to have people have, less than a minute. But in most, there are very few bills that are going to get more than an hour of committee time. So once you've got staff reports and prime sponsors speaking, then that means maybe 20 or 30 people total could testify. So it does make an impression, it does make an impression that obviously it's very low cost to sign in to a hearing in support or in opposition to a bill, you can also submit written testimony, and that goes into the record for the bill, and people see that. And I do think that that is an impactful way to participate in the process.
Okay, thanks. Before we go into question and the Q&A portion, let me just summarize some of what Nicole Macri sent for everybody. Right here. Okay, let's see. I'll read some of this. I'll summarize some. I'll just read verbatim. Nicole writes, "I'm sorry I'm not able to join you all this evening. I'm on a flight to Washington, D.C. to participate in the Housing as a Human Right Forum hosted by the National Homelessness Law Center and to receive their nonpartisan state legislature of the year award for my work on housing first approaches for unhoused people and renter protection policies. I'm grateful to serve with Frank and Jamie, who are champions on a number of key issues, including access to housing, K through 12 and higher education, gun violence prevention, police accountability, climate action, worker protections, and essential care for people living with disabilities. It's a delight to be able to partner with them on so many district priorities." And then she lists four priorities for her for this session: access to abortion and gender affirming care. She's working with advocates and legislatures to protect the rights to abortion and gender affirming care in Washington and to expand access to these essential health services. She's also wanting to bring back the Keep Our Care Act to limit the negative impacts of health system mergers and acquisitions on access to reproductive, gender affirming, and end-of-life care. Let me just add a little bit of commentary on that, with meaning in there that a lot of hospitals have been consolidated, particularly under Catholic organization ownership, which has resulted in a reduction in access to abortion and gender affirming care. That last bit was my commentary. That was not Nicole's statement. Next one is additional access to healthcare, expanding health coverage for low-income people regardless of their immigration status, increase subsidies so low and middle-income people can purchase individual health plans, stabilizing and expanding the workforce in behavioral health and long-term care, and working to ensure hospitals can maintain bed availability. Third big priority is housing and homelessness. She talks about a package of bills, one that will increase the supply of housing by eliminating local exclusionary zoning and allowing a greater diversity of housing types to be built, expediting permitting, eliminating parking requirements, and more. Second one is stabilizing people at risk of losing their homes by prohibiting rent gouging, requiring extended notice for larger rent increases, security deposit protection, some court improvements, etc. Let's see, providing support to small landlords to implement new protections for their tenants. And then the third thing in that package is subsidizing access to housing for people with the greatest barriers by enacting more progressive revenue to increase home ownership opportunities for Black households, build more subsidized and deeply affordable housing, including permanent supportive housing, and increasing the small landlord mitigation funds that allow their tenants to retain their homes when they face financial hardships. And then the fourth priority that she mentions is climate resilient infrastructure and transitioning away from fossil fuel use. So a number of things in there. And then last thing she says, she plans to bring back a bill that requires public entities to transition away from gas-powered landscaping equipment. So that was Nicole Macri's priorities. And with that, let's move into Q&A. We sent out a survey to the membership, and we got back some good results on that. And let me pull, I have so many windows open. The top ones the top list in of issues that people are interested in were clean energy, housing affordability, economic justice and taxes, transit, housing, zoning reform, education, and universal healthcare. And then there's several questions that people had in addition to those. And to kick us off, I'll ask a couple of questions. If any of you have questions, any of you who are in attendance have questions, please put them into the chat, and I'll sprinkle your questions in with ones that came in on the questionnaire. So let's see. I'll do two to start here. One for Frank in particular, and then one for both Jamie and Frank. Frank, you talked about the my term, not your term, reparations for minorities who were redlined out of homeownership. You talked about some funding for that. As you're aware, something that is kind of close to my interest is how private golf courses benefited from racial restrictive covenants, particularly in how that has resulted in the building of wealth with golf courses and around private golf courses, which are receiving a pretty sweet property tax deal. And I'm wondering if there's any movement on looking at that as a way of funding these reparations for the redlining that Washington had in the past.
Well, I'm very open to trying to figure out a solution on that, Paul. I know we've talked about that issue about the golf courses. I also have identified some golf courses that should be converted into affordable housing, but we can get into that later. Right now, I've got basically over 20 major sites I'm helping to develop across King County for affordable housing. At the same time, one of the key things is this whole notion of home ownership. The fund source we have identified for it is the document recording assessment, because that's directly related to the nexus of the state recording those documents with the racist covenants. So there's a bit of a legal strategy there for that source. But if we could figure out a way to address and change and reform the property taxation on golf courses, I would definitely be in favor of that. The key is just trying to figure out what the solution is. You know, we did some research on that together and with the House research staff, and it was not clear how we could do that. And so we have to sort of figure out what can we move forward as we can. But I'm still much interested in helping on that, and I appreciate your interest on that. The other thing is that you use the word reparations. What's important to get legislation passed is not only the creative policy idea, which I think we've got. I mean, I'm really excited about this, but also we need to focus in on the words we use and the message we use. So we're trying to get separated from the whole issue of affirmative action, because that's going to be for the U.S. Supreme Court, and doesn't look good there in terms of affirmative action on preference on getting into certain colleges. On the other hand, we need to try to figure out what the public would most like to see and hear about these policies. So that's why I keep emphasizing home ownership, which has broad public opinion, and not necessarily in the 43rd, because we got a lot of renters, but to get votes around the state, the notion of home ownership really resonates. So we're still trying to figure out what words we should use, including the word reparation. So we talked about things like mitigation for past wrongs rather than reparations, but I'm for whatever works. So we're doing hopefully some polling here soon, just to identify the specific words, because some words excite a lot of opposition, other words seem, well, that's okay, that kind of thing. So thanks, Paul.
All right. And thanks for that clarification on language. And again, if anyone has questions, please just type them into the chat, and we'll call on you to ask those. So for both of you, I think you both have talked about and are aware of the taxation imbalance that we have in Washington, where we've got one of, if not the most regressive tax structure in the country. What do you see as the likelihood of getting a wealth tax passed, an income tax reform in this legislative session? And I'll give you the first chance to speak this time, Jamie. We can go to Frank if needed.
Okay, so from my perspective, the big news for this next session is actually starting in the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court will hear oral arguments on the capital gains tax, which we've already passed in late January. And, with any luck, we might actually have a decision from them before the end of session. My hope is that that decision will not only uphold the capital gains tax, but will do so in a way that overturns what I think are decades of bad precedent, saying that income taxes are taxes on property and therefore are subject to the constitutional restrictions on property taxes. So that would open up, just as the case that Frank and I and David Frocht and Laurie Jenkins organized 10 years ago, that overturned the 2/3 majority requirement for raising taxes. That would open up a whole new set of conversations about progressive taxation in our state. And so I'm really excited about the prospects for that case. In the meantime, I think one of the things that over the last 16 years I've learned the most from Frank is that for most of the state, it is best to start out with talking about what we need the revenue for, and then start talking about, how to do it in a way that is as progressive as possible. So, I think it's fine to talk amongst ourselves about a wealth tax. I think the work group that now Senator-elect Frame has been leading for the last couple of years has done some really great work on possible revisions to the B&O tax, making it into a margins tax, has also worked on the wealth tax. I think that there is a version of the wealth tax that probably could be very popular and would actually raise revenue to do some of the things that we're talking about needing, whether that's housing or services for folks with disabilities. And so I think there's a possibility there, but it hasn't gotten any significant discussion yet in the Senate. Just had its first hearing this last session, and I think there's a lot of groundwork to do before we're going to get there. So not impossible, and I think that that's something that we're going to be talking about a lot in the 2023 session. But again, I think for the legislature as a whole, it's going to be and for the people of the state, it's going to be best to focus on what our needs are in terms of investments for the state.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie, and thanks for the call out there on this thing. I've been obviously working on raising lots of revenue over the years, and it's followed that basic philosophy. The first thing you need to do is identify what you want to fund with it, because the public around the state, they do support things like basic education and healthcare and free college university tuition for low-income students, and that kind of list of things that we've already enacted, including the Fair Start for Kids Act, which was raising $500 million per year for for childcare and early learning. And so we emphasize the investments in childcare and early learning, and then we put it into a dedicated fund, which is the second key part of this strategy. And then thirdly, we identified the revenue source that was progressive, and that being the capital gains tax. So Jamie's absolutely right. If all of you, I don't know if you're religious or not, but if you want to help and pray that the Supreme Court sustains the capital gains tax, we'd probably all appreciate it, because that's critical that we win that U.S. Supreme Court test. And the key about it is not just the philosophy or the ideology of it, but it's $500 million we're counting on for really basic services for people to have childcare for their kids while they go to work, et cetera. And then at the same time, the four funding sources I'm working on are definitely progressive. And the wealth tax is one of those. And I've been working with Noel Frame a lot and a lot of other members to figure out how to go forward on this. And again, I keep emphasizing what Jamie said, which is you have a 1, 2, 3 strategy. First is, what do you want to invest in? And invest in things that the general public says, you know, God, we should do that. And then secondly, a dedicated fund, because the people around the state, they don't trust the legislature to raise taxes. Now, sorry about that. Maybe in our district, we're okay. But the rest of the state, not so much. And then the third one is to make sure that it be something that makes the tax system more fair and doesn't tax generally across the public. So I'm very heartened with the possibility of what I'm working on with other people, is that partnering with a number of legislators to propose a package of services that would have a unifying theme to help people who frankly have disabilities, which would include potentially, I mean, this is what we're working on, and we're trying to work through the details, which is not easy, but one of which, for example, would be special education funding. That's something that we didn't quite get to as much as we should under basic education. Also, there's 15,000 people who are developmentally disabled that need basic services, and we don't fund them at the state level. And so that's that fund source, or excuse me, that investment, I guarantee you, will be supported by the public, because if they know who's being benefited, which are folks with developmental disabilities, they're going to say, yeah, okay, all right, now what's the fund source? And then we can get into it. So we have 4 or 5 key parts of this investment package. And we hope that potentially that the wealth tax would work. But again, it takes a lot of research and a lot of things to make sure it's workable, so it's actually generating money for what we care for. But so far, I'm making progress with members saying that we got to follow this 1, 2, 3 strategy, because that's what we've done repeatedly for many of our fund sources for good causes. And in many of the things that we do at the state legislature in Washington State, we're literally the best in the nation, except in certain areas about helping people with disabilities, including the housing and the workforce and the developmental disability. So I'm hopeful now that the election gave us the votes to move forward on something, and we got to figure out the details of it to make sure it's workable.
Okay. And just for clarification, this is the state Supreme Court that is going to be hearing the case, not the U.S. Supreme Court, right?
Yes, on the capital gains, yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. We have a question here from Anne Marie Lowe. Anne Marie, it looks like you're already unmuted. Feel free to ask your question.
Yeah, so Jamie Peterson, you made mention of decriminalizing drug possession. I wonder if you can explain your position there and how you arrived at that position, and whether you think that your constituents are in line with you on that rationale.
So I think, you know, this is in some ways a very simple question, and in some ways a very complicated question. The simple answer is, I don't think that the criminal law is the way to treat people who have a substance use problem. And I think
are you conflating substance use with drug possession?
Well, except for illegal substances, yes, I am conflating substance use with drug possession. Are you suggesting that there ought to be more legal recreational drug use? Is that the?
No, I think I heard you say that just explain your position. Did you say that you want to decriminalize drug possession, all amounts, all types?
Okay, so here's what has happened in order. We have had a law for 50 years that criminalized drug possession, any amount, and regardless of whether the possession was intentional or even knowing, right? The state Supreme Court in this Blake case struck down our felony drug possession law, and essentially said it was a case about a woman who had a very small amount of, I think, methamphetamine in a jeans pocket of hers. She had recently purchased the jeans secondhand, and she claimed that she did not even know that she had possession of the drugs. The Spokane prosecuting attorney, in his great wisdom, prosecuted her anyway for felony possession. And the state Supreme Court struck down the law, which, by the way, it had previously upheld twice, and said that in a 5-4 decision, said that it was unconstitutional to make someone a felon when they did not even necessarily know that they had possession of drugs. So as a result, our drug possession statute was gone. Roger Goodman, the chair of the House Public Safety Committee, 9 days earlier had had a hearing on an ACLU proposal that would have done full decriminalization over a 4-year period with big investments in behavioral health, essentially to help people who have substance use problems. And that bill didn't have the support to get out of committee, even with a 4-year timeline. 9 days later, the Supreme Court gave us a 0-day timeline because we had no more drug possession statute. So the legislature, in a very messy compromise, came up with a misdemeanor approach for drug possession for 2 years, as we were trying to build on the fly a system to take care of, to do healthcare approach for folks with substance use. So, you know, that's what we're trying to solve. The status quo is going to be on, if the legislature doesn't take any action, the status quo is going to be full decriminalization statewide, except that individual cities and counties can return to doing as much as a gross misdemeanor for simple possession. And I think I think there are probably very few people who think that the right answer is for every city and county to have a different criminal law policy about drug possession. So the attempt is going to be to find some compromise that can win majorities in both houses and get the support of the governor that will help get more people who need treatment into treatment. So I don't know if that helps explain, and happy to, if I left stuff unclear, happy to answer more questions.
All right. Thank you for that. Let me get another one here. So this past week, we saw a shooting at a fatal shooting, unfortunately, at Ingram High School. And there was a massive student walkout this past week, demanding mental health counselors, a mental health counselor for every 200 students in Seattle schools. In 2014, Washington voters passed an initiative 1351 to reduce class sizes and to increase the number of social workers and counselors in schools. I don't believe that this initiative has been fully funded yet. Are there plans to fully fund this initiative as the students have demanded in order to provide better mental health support and reduce school shootings in Washington?
So we did make pretty substantial progress in the hundreds of millions of dollars last session about adding counselors and other mental health professionals, nurses to schools, changing the allocation formula for how we drive out dollars to school districts. There's no question that we could do more. And Paul, you're correct that we have never fully funded Initiative 1351. That's part of what I was referring to at the top about how we might be able to preserve essentially the box of what we currently fund for public schools, even though they have lower enrollment, and redirect those dollars so that they're going out to districts to support some of these priorities. So yes, I would absolutely I would support that change, and I think there will be substantial discussion about it. I don't know if the exact formulas for class sizes that were in 1351 are the right answer, but I think reduction of class sizes it is something that we ought to be continuing to work for. And then I'll just say, in addition to the manufacturer liability bill that I am bringing, we are going to have a bill to ban the sale of assault weapons. That's going to be both governor and attorney general request. And I think that the stars are finally aligning, that we have a chance, using the same pathway that we did for high capacity magazines, to get that bill passed in the 2023 session.
Thank you. Frank, anything for you wanted to add?
Only to say that when we talk about funding that initiative, that takes a bunch of money, obviously. And so we need to have a strategy not only on the budget expenditure side, but on the budget resources side. And right now, the revenues of the state are going down because of this early signs of the recession, layoffs, etc. And many of the fund sources, the revenue is declining right now. So people are very worried about the next budget, including the fact that because of the inflationary pressures, the collective bargaining agreements for all sorts of workers, not just state employees, but teachers, home care workers, nurses, etc., are projected to be hundreds and millions of dollars into the billions. So just to fund what we currently fund, we got a really tough budget challenge. That's why I've been spending so much time thinking of ideas about how we could increase the resources to do and invest in the priorities of the people across the state. And we certainly support the collective bargaining agreements, that's for sure, but it eats up a lot of money. So to go beyond that, yes, there are certain parts of that were in that initiative 1351 that we should actively support, and including raising resources to fund them. In addition to the thing, as I said before, as Jamie mentioned about special education funding, that should be included as a top priority because of the critical human need there. So we got to keep in mind the budget situation looks problematic right now, worrisome.
Yep.
And Jamie and I have been through that before, so we know we're going to get through it. But it's we need to think through logically what the public thinks we ought to invest in, and then proceed from that.
Okay. GH, you've got a question here in chat. If you can unmute, if you can summarize this, that'd be great.
Yeah, so in 2019, there used to be like behavioral health organizations, North Sound and et cetera, all around the state. And they would fund detox and addiction recovery centers ahead of time, like a month ahead of time, just a month ahead of time. They changed that in the middle of 2019, and it became that the state had to funnel all of that through MCOs, managed care organizations, who hold back as much as they possibly can, find all sorts of reasons not to pay, and they're not paying nonprofit addiction recovery centers who have very little staff. They don't have somebody who's, I mean, most of them now have someone who's dedicated just to collecting, nothing else. They don't do anything else. They were forced to also do these ridiculously expensive upgrades to their tech systems so that they could connect to the MCOs. And I'm talking like $500,000 each. And then the MCOs, of which there are at least 4, said, oh, well, that's not quite right. The specs that we had you build these to aren't quite right. So they've been kicked around quite a lot, and it's been extremely inefficient, and yet the state has not responded. In the meanwhile, the federal government has dumped money to the state, but these organizations cannot get them. They cannot get the funding because it has to go through the MCOs, and the MCOs make it so hard to get the funding. They've tremendously increased the administrative cost, and at the same time, of course, nursing costs have gone through the roof. And of course, at the same time, they have more clients than ever before. So you have to have nurses on staff 24 hours a day when someone's going through a detox from fentanyl, because it's an extreme medical event for that individual. So there's been very little attention paid to them. There's suddenly, I'm on the board of one of them, and there's suddenly, I worked there previously. I was put on the board after working there as an interim for a while. So I'm just kind of intimately involved in this. But at a time they should be increasing capacity, you're almost forcing them to shut down at the state level. It makes no sense. There's funding there for them. Something's gone very, very wrong. And that's across the state. So they're in the middle of building a new building, and we're thinking we may have to shut it down before the building even opens. It's up in, a cheaper part of the state. But this
Frank,
kind
Jamie,
of,
any responses?
Well, I actually have worked hard to raise additional funding for detox facilities, et cetera. So I would like to have more detail about it. Now, GH, in your other photo, it is a photo of you with Nicole Macri. So Nicole and I and Jamie need to work together to address this. This is extremely important. And this is one of the things we're trying to provide more funding for in terms of behavioral health. It's a priority for our caucus, and we are serious about it. Nicole is, frankly, more knowledgeable about this arena than I am. I just want to be supportive and try to figure out how to fund those programs. But there's 3 different detox facilities that I directly got funded through the capital budget and the operating budget in years past. So it really pains me to hear the facts that you lay out there, that things are obviously not going very well. So if you could send Nicole and myself and Jamie an email sort of outlining what your points are, then we can follow up and try to figure out how to address it in terms of the operating budget as well, because this is it's a huge need, and we've got to address it. And the other thing about it is that it's a bipartisan realization. We've got Republican legislators whose family members, their sons, their daughters, their family members have drug challenges, shall we say. And so this is something that we might be able to get broader public support for, to fund this stuff, even though the whole issue of drug addiction has been demonized by some of the right-wing interests. So if you wouldn't mind putting your thing into a page or 2 of an email, and then we'll try to figure out how we can address it. The other thing is that managed care organizations, I'm not the expert on that, but I think Nicole knows that better than I.
they are a complete
Thank you.
nightmare. I don't know who thought that up, but it's the worst thing I've ever seen. I've
all right.
seen the data, all the data, and the hundreds and thousands of things they've rejected for any little tiny excuse by a very careful organization.
Yeah, I agree. It wasn't me who did that. I've raised questions about that before, so I really appreciate your speaking up on this.
Okay, thank you. A question that came in from our survey, how can we protect against global warming as soon as possible? We've had many years of smoke-filled summers. We provide shelters, free air filtration, and AC. Are there other things we can do to help mitigate the direct impact that we're seeing in the Pacific Northwest around climate change?
Well, I guess I'll start on this. So we have already taken pretty dramatic action that in terms of the 100% Clean Electricity Act, and the Climate Commitment Act, that will put us on a path over the next 5 and 10 and 15 years to make dramatic reductions in carbon from our state. That doesn't mean that there isn't more to do. We're going to be able this session, I think, to make significant progress on 2 remaining major sources. So one is the built environment and providing incentives for reducing carbon from buildings. And the second is from vehicles and creating a better charging network as a draw for people to get electric vehicles, and then possibly using Climate Commitment Act dollars to help incentivize that transition, not just for private vehicles, but for school bus fleets, all sorts of other uses. So I think we are absolutely focused on trying to make that transition as fast as possible, keeping in mind that in some ways, we're a pretty small fish in the global fight, but we can be a significant leader in demonstrating that this change and this transition is possible and economically beneficial. So because we can politically, I think we have a responsibility to lead in that way and sort of point the way for other places.
Thanks. Frank, anything?
No, I think Jamie answered it okay. I mean, we could talk more about the climate thing, which I met with the Environmental Caucus a few days ago. But for right now, that's enough, I think.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Another question that came in from our survey was about some housing at University of Washington. The UW is planning to privatize or sell some ground leases for 4 plots of graduate student housing to a private developer. And that's going to be mostly market rate housing. Rather than turning that over to the private for-profit, can we use that public land for permanent housing that's under UW's management? Frank, this is
absolutely. Yeah, Jamie, if you don't mind, I'll do this because I've been working on this thing. It really, frankly, pisses me off that the university administration, I know this directly from talking to the university administration in 3 different meetings, that they're planning to sell off basically or transfer to private for-profit developers off-campus housing for students. These are usually graduate students or teaching or research assistants who are trying to, have an affordable house to live in while they're completing their studies. And so their brilliant idea they came up was to spin off or dispense with those housing, put it into private for-profit control and ownership, in order to fund on-campus student housing in the the Lambert halls and the other dormitories I don't know if they call them dormitories anymore, but you know what I mean. It's on-campus student housing. This is absolutely the wrong approach. I said that there's a much better way to deal with this. I talked directly to Anna Markause about it. She said, yes, Frank, let us put our heads together to come up with a solution. I am not satisfied with what they proposed so far. And we need to, I've been working with also people at the UAW 4121, who's their union representing the research and teaching assistants, because it's their members who are living in some of the housing here. There's a better way to do this, to not only fund on-campus housing, because they do need to be renovated, no question about it, but also not at the expense of the off-campus students, because if you handed over the operations and the maintenance of those off-campus things to a private for-profit developer, the rents will guarantee to be much higher than if it was in public ownership, public operation, or nonprofit ownership. So I'm very, very distressed about this. And I've been working with the UAW 4121 to try to come up with an approach on this thing. It's just, the University of Washington is a public university. They need to act like it.
Is there any legislative option here to prohibit?
Well, that's one idea that was suggested. There's also other suggestions about trying to link up with other ways to finance the off-campus housing, because I'm not sure what the answer is yet, Paul, but I'm very distressed about this. I'm doing what I can to try to explore options on this thing, but I'm not satisfied at all with their approach so far, which all it does is just raise the rents for off-campus student housing. We can do better than that through public or nonprofit operations.
Thanks. Jacob, did you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, I have 2 mute buttons. Yeah, so this is my question. So thanks, Frank, for answering it, because I completely agree with you. I'm a grad student at UW right now, although I don't live in grad student housing. I can just see it out my window. And it's just very frustrating because one part of their plan also is to move family housing from right next to U Village, like the one like Blakely Village that touches it, to the Laurelhurst Village, which maybe sounds nice, except then now people with families, and a lot of international students here don't have cars, they now have to walk them across a 5-lane road to get to any amenity in the area. And like U Village is one of the most walkable areas in the state. And so just like losing that, or not in the state, in the city, losing that is just bad, I guess is a good way to describe it. So if there's any way I can help get involved with what you're doing, I would love to contribute because it's it's just a big issue to me. So.
Yes, if you could work with the folks at UAW 4121, they've got a group of their members who are very concerned about this. I got to check in with them again to figure out what the next steps are. But this is a serious issue. And I just think the university is going down the wrong path on this thing. There's a better way of dealing with this. So please call them. Emily Myers is one that I've been working with there, but there's others as well in the leadership of the union.
All right,
Thank you.
thanks. Jamie, you had, there's another question from the survey. You had talked before about, if I had this right, responsibility for plastic manufacturers on the climate impact or recycling or something like that. The question that came in from our survey was, where did I have it? I just lost it. Oh, will you actively support expanded producer responsibilities in recycling? And I think the answer is at least in part yes, but if you can talk more about what that is and whatnot.
The answer is yes. So last session, Senator Doss had the bill. There's been quite a bit of work on it, and it is actually one of the top priorities for the environmental community for 2023. Christine Rolfes is going to be the prime sponsor of the bill in the 2023 session, at least on the Senate side. I don't know who will be on the House side, but they're working very hard to essentially make the manufacturers who use plastic packaging responsible for making sure that it's recyclable and taking care of the waste that comes from the products that they put out. So I absolutely will be doing what I can to advance that policy and help it get to the governor's desk.
Is it just around plastics or is it other recycling as well?
I think this one is focused on plastics, but I'll confess that I have not seen the final language of the bill that's coming.
Okay. Let's see, let me pick another one here. Let's see, as we're a majority renter district, how can we make voting easier for people that move often? So renters, students, young people are often impacted by this. A specific example that was from the question was, why doesn't Washington offer automatic voter registration updates for students at public universities? As an example. And there's probably other things we can do to make it easier for voter registration updates to happen.
So I'll maybe start with this. So we have, I think, passed a set of laws over the last 5 years since the Democrats have been back in control of the whole legislature that probably, I don't think any other state can rival what we've done in terms of all mail voting, automatic voter registration, same day registration, paying for return postage on ballots. And, you know, the fact that we had in this election 2 or 3 hour line at Lumen Field of people who were going on the very last on election day to get themselves registered suggests that is working in many ways, that the word is getting out. And our voter turnout has been enviably high in the last few cycles. I'm not I mean, I think these majorities in the House and Senate are absolutely all ears about how we can make it easier for people to vote. I do want to say I'm not sure that it's consistent with the intent of voters automatically to change their registration without any involvement by them. I know there are a lot of students at, you know, whether it's at UW or Western or whatever, who vote more strategically than that, right? They may leave their registration in Kent or Gig Harbor, where they make a difference in a swing race, rather than coming to vote in the 43rd. Or by contrast, maybe they know that the 42nd, where Western is one of the most hotly contested districts. And so they purposefully move out of some hopeless red district into the 42nd where their vote can make a difference. So I'd want to be careful before I started making automatic changes to where someone's voting that are not initiated by that voter.
Can I chime in here too? I want to reiterate what Jamie said. I believe, based on what I know, that Washington State has the best voting rights and voting access system in the nation. And that wasn't by accident. I remember when Sam Hunt proposed all mail balloting years ago, and the ones who beat us at that time was Oregon. Oregon was the first. We were a close second. But that one thing, plus all the other things we've done to increase voter access, it really makes a difference, and it helps ensure that the people have the opportunity to exercise their voice and their vote. As a result, I'm really proud that we're probably the best in the nation on that subject, and others as well. But it's we shouldn't take it for granted. There was a lot of hard work over many years to systematically add additional components of that. So we're the best in the nation. So feel good about it.
And I'll just chime in one more time to piggyback on that. I was fascinated to see in this election cycle that Oregon has finally followed our policy of allowing votes to be counted that are postmarked by election day, rather than saying that they have to be received on election day. You know, the Seattle Times complain, every cycle they complain about how long it takes to decide elections in our state. And guess what? Efficiency is not the most important principle in the election system. We want to make sure that every vote is counted, right? So that's why we have always said they just have to be postmarked by elections day, and then we understand that the votes may trickle in over time.
Thank you both for that. Frank, you talked about workforce improvements, and some other key job needs that we have. Community colleges often do a lot to help drive the workforce. Community college funding, however, is pretty low. Community college professors don't, make all that much money. Is there any focus on improving community college funding?
Well, thanks, Paul. Absolutely. As Jamie knows, and Jamie's been at some of the meetings, I was tapped to try to help figure out a way to fund the community colleges in Seattle. There were 4 workforce-related programs there: the Maritime Academy, the Culinary Program, the Wood Tech Center, and the Apparel Program. And they were, running short of money. And we have a package of investments to not only save those 4 programs, but then in order to get something for Seattle, we need to help community colleges across the state. So the state board, with our involvement and advocacy, is advocating for a pretty sizable increase in state funding for community colleges in the area of workforce. At the same time, that's not enough. We need more funding for that. That's why I'm strongly urging that we consider and enact an expansion of the Workforce Education Investment Act, because that act in 2019, most of the money at that time went to free college and university tuition for all low-income students, which I'm very proud about, by the way. I figure, look, I was a low-income student from East Bremerton. I went at low tuition at the UW, and I figured, well, we had to make sure other low-income students nowadays ought to have the same deal that I had. So we did that, but we also invested some of that money into targeted workforce programs. So a big priority for us is to put more money into community colleges for workforce programs, including nursing, for example. That's why I really fought hard to save Pacific Tower for a community health college of the Seattle colleges to go in there in that Beacon Hill beautiful building. So we're churning out hundreds of nurses every year because of that effort. We have to do that statewide, and we have to reform the production of those certificates or degrees in a way that makes sense. For example, there was an article, sorry to say this, there was an article in the Seattle Times that said there are, I don't like them either, Jamie, but at any rate, they said there's several ways we can produce more of those workers, including more funding at the community colleges, but also reforming the regulatory system to allow more people to become nurses and other certificated staff. So it's a very high priority. But again, the budget math is problematic right now. We can't do all this stuff unless we, increase the resources we have. So we got to be real smart about this to focus on the high priorities and then walk down the list as far as we can to make sure the priorities of the people are funded.
Sounds like we need an income tax.
Well, if you want to talk about that math, we can talk about that math. By the way, I appreciate Robin's chat comment that we need more electricians. I love that because my dad was a 55-year member of the IBEW electrical workers. So thank you, Robin. I really appreciate that.
All right, we're at about 10 to 9. So I'll wrap it up here. Thank you very much to both of you for coming and spending so much of your time this evening, particularly Jamie, before your big Senate retreat tomorrow, where you get to hobnob with all the other senators. But thank you both for coming to this and for being candid with your replies to the questions and helping us understand how we can get better involved in the upcoming legislative session. So thank you both very much.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks. And okay, so with that, we'll turn to the end portion of our meeting, our committee reports. Let me just call out the committees. If the chairs want to have anything, want to say anything, they can do that at this time. First up, mutual aid. Anything, Dawn, to say?
No, I'm going to put it on hiatus until the I-135 educational event is done. And
Okay.
that's
All right, thank you. Sophia, anything about King County?
No, nothing. I think Tara was going to say something about it.
Yeah, if I could just real briefly, Amy mentioned this in passing when we were talking about our reorg. The King County Democrats reorg is on Sunday, December 11th. All elected PCOs will be invited to that. It will be online. You will be getting information, but keep a lookout for that. And if you want to talk about any of the candidates for office, I will put my information and Sophia's information in the chat. Feel free to contact us or look us up in the exec board section of the website, because it could be contested elections, and we'd like to also keep the 43rd people in touch about that. Thanks.
All right, thank you both. Amy said that she doesn't have anything for state. I'll note also that the state reorg is happening in January, and there'll be more information coming about that later. For the policy committee, I don't think that Camille is here, so we'll move on from there. And then finally, PCOs, Cody.
Yeah, hi. I'll try and go through this pretty quickly. I just thought it might be beneficial to give some quick stats and some quick context on the election that we just had. Does that sound like a decent use of 2 to 3 minutes? Cool. Yeah, all right, let me pull this up here. So voter turnout in King County was 65.64%. And in the 43rd, we had 69.16%. So we were a little above the average of all the LDs. And while that number, I think, sounds a little lower than we might be used to in maybe say the 2020 election when we were reading off the stats, I think it's also a good reminder of some of the impact that we had, right? Because without all you all out there turning out the vote, midterms can be a lower turnout. And so I think we put in a lot of good work to ensure that some competitive races really went our way, right? We helped elect Senator Patty Murray, King County Prosecutor Lisa Mannion, Representative Pramila Jayapal, and all of our Washington State delegation that we just saw, Jamie Peterson, Frank Chop, Nicole Macri. And so locally, we supported these strong candidates that are interested in strengthening our communities. right? And I was lucky enough to be able to celebrate with some of you at the King County Bounce Party. So that was really cool to kind of celebrate our wins in that way. And zooming out a little bit, right? I just want to highlight that we were part of a nationwide coalition of Democrats and progressives successfully pushing back against anti-democratic forces seeking to kind of gain a foothold in this country. And so I just want to give a big shout out to everyone who took on a voter contact list, whether you're at PCO and you were turning out your precinct, whether you were getting keyed into a specific race that you were passionate about here in Washington. I'll give an extra shout out to Tatiana. I'm not sure if they're on the call tonight, but Tatiana and their daughter, Tatiana's a PCO in 1996 precinct, for anyone who doesn't know, but Tatiana and her daughter went down, took, I think, 3 separate trips down to Washington's 3rd congressional district, where Marie Perez had a pretty surprising, a good surprise, but a pretty surprising victory against Joe Kent down there. So that's just another example, I think, of 43rd members really finding places where their passion can be turned into some progressive yards that we're putting on the proverbial field. So just wanted to give a huge thanks to everyone for their energy there, and looking ahead a little bit to reorg. I think I'll be able to talk about this more in January as well, but I would love to have more folks on the PCO committee, really looking to have more members there. And I'll drop my email and my phone number in the chat right here. There you go. And if you're not sure kind of how much time you have to commit or what it looks like, happy to talk about it. But I would love to have more folks both able to help out with some of what we're doing on the PCO side, and also just being able to kind of share some of the databases and some of the knowledge bases that I have, so that there are other folks who are able to do these things as well. All right, that's all I got. Thanks, Paul.
All right, thanks, Cody. And as Tara mentioned earlier in the meeting, appointed PCOs will vacate their positions at the end of the month. And we would love to have you come back as an appointed PCO again in the new year. And we'll have information out about how you can become an appointed PCO again. We do have many precincts without a PCO. And so we'll also work out a way for you to figure out whether or not there is a PCO in your precinct, so that if there isn't and you're interested in becoming a PCO, we can get you in as an appointed PCO after the reorg in January. So please do consider that as one way to get involved. And Amy actually does have something about the state committee to talk about.
Hi, everyone. This is Amy Madden, your state committee rep. I just had 2 things that I wanted to share with you. One is that, I'm really connected with party leaders in other states as part of my job. And I just really wanted to give you kind of the inside scoop on Colorado with that Lauren Boebert race. I want you to know that the Colorado Democrats are working incredibly hard to contact every single person that they can who had a contested ballot to make sure to cure those ballots. And that's when, somebody signed their ballot and it didn't match what was on file. And so we just need to get a hold of them and make sure that they get a chance to sign it again. With the work that the Colorado Democrats are doing, they are so far ahead of the Republicans. They have cured almost all of their ballots in some areas, and they're working on getting them all cured in other areas. There's some very low income areas where you have 10 folks living in like a 1,000 square foot place, and that not everybody has their addresses easily attainable, and they're going in and getting a hold of all of these people. So I wanted to let you know there is a lot of hope in that Boebert race, and stay tuned. And I just really wanted to let you know that there are Democratic volunteers in Colorado that are just absolutely killing it over there with the work they're doing. The other thing I wanted to mention is that at this last election, you may have noticed that there were wait times at Lumen Field, like 2 hours plus to be able to vote. Bellevue College, all over the state, we had people showing up that we're able to vote because of our same day registration laws. And I've talked to Shasti Conrad, current chair of the King County Democrats, and some other King County Democrats leaders about how much there is a need going forward to have teams of folks, volunteers, who can be a part of ballot printing for people who need a ballot printed the day of election, who need to be in charge of like bringing food out to the volunteers or out to the volunteers and to the people lining up, because we had hundreds of folks at Lumen Field who would have gone home had King County Democrats not provided food for those folks. And Shasti Conrad was out there. I want to let you know our representative Nicole Macri was out there helping. Shasti put out the call, like anybody who can come help, please help. And Nicole showed up. And Gurmai Zahalai, our wonderful King County representative, was out there doing that too. So, but we need more folks to show up and be part of those volunteer teams. And if that's something you're interested in, really making a difference for democracy in this way, please let me know, let Sophia Lee know, and let Cody and some of the other, just contact folks on the board and we'll get you hooked up to be part of those teams next time. And I think that's all from me. Just a lot of hope, democracy right now.
Thanks, Amy. And Dawn, you wanted to talk about the Initiative 135 Social Housing Initiative.
Thank you, Paul. I just wanted to put on everyone's radar that it is shaping up. It is still, it is solidifying and slightly fluid, but definitely it's going to be at Numos. And the most possible date is January 29th. And we have some talent lined up and potential speakers. And we would definitely love your involvement if anyone would like to volunteer for getting out the vote and contacting the PCOs. And I just wanted to put that on the radar that this is really important. And we have been talking about housing and behavioral health all throughout this meeting. And I just wanted to end that note. And thank you, Paul, for that opportunity to advance that.
Sure. And this is just to make sure everyone knows, this is an educational and get out the vote event for the Initiative 135 Social Housing Initiative in Seattle that we unanimously supported. Gosh, it seems like almost it's not a year ago, it feels like it though, back in March or something like that. If you're interested in that and interested in getting involved, please talk to Dawn. And Dawn, yes.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I was just raising my hand when you said, please talk to me. I'm like, yes, please talk to me.
Yeah.
And to reiterate what Paul said, this is completely educational event. This is not a fundraising event to inspire all demographics to vote yes on I-135 in the special elections. And I'm going to put my email in the chats. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dawn. All right, and with that, we're at 9 o'clock, but I did want to give a little bit of time for good of the order. If anyone here has anything they would like to say good of the order, please just raise your hand and I will call on you. All right, anyone? Anyone? All right. With that, unless there's any objections, I would like to end this meeting. Thank you all for your participation. Thank you all for providing your input on the survey for our electeds to help frame the conversation we had tonight, for the questions you asked here as well. And also thank you all for voting and being involved here in this org so that we can help improve democracy, improve Washington State, improve Seattle. So with that, thank you all, everyone, and good night.
Good night. Thanks, Paul. Well said. See you later.
Thank you so much. Have a good night, all.